Good evening, everyone. I'm Leah Cooper with your JCN News for this Thursday, March 28th. Thanks so much for joining us. Leading Bahamian environmental groups Brief, Re-Earth, Save the Bays, and Waterkeepers Bahamas again expressing their concerns with the terms of the heads of agreement tabled in Parliament last week for the proposed development by Disney Cruise Line for Lighthouse Point in South Eleuthera. The heads of agreement reveals that the project's much larger and potentially more damaging than previously indicated. In a release issued this afternoon, the group says that the project sidesteps promises of full access to the site for Bahamians and raises new troubling questions about the economic benefits for the country. That said, the group's calling for a full review of the project, particularly calling Disney to prepare an environmental assessment considering alternatives and economic analysis open to public review and consultations. Now, in September of last year, Disney released its economic development project for South Eleuthera, promising concerned Bahamians that Lighthouse Point would be used for low-density purposes like beach chairs, umbrellas, and small support structures. On the flip side, though, the heads of agreement describes a huge infrastructure project that will forever change the area's landscape, an obvious area of concern for environmentalists. Under the terms of the heads of agreement, the group also explains that Bahamians will be severely condensed in their economic access to passengers and will not experience anything resembling the promised economic vitality that captured the imagination of South Eleutherans. The group also reveals that the heads of agreement pledges to Disney that its Lighthouse Point revenues will never be taxed in any form. It further exempts Disney from the payment of any real property taxes for 20 years. Now, on the topic of jobs, Disney initially promised 150 jobs, but the group questions why is the public supposed to be satisfied with that unenforceable target while Disney expects to bring as many as 20,000 passengers per week to the site. Disney will also decide who gets hired and from what country, which they say is at the detriment of Bahamian labor. Now, another concern is that Bahamians will only be allowed to use the property and the sea around it, subject to the sole discretion of Disney with respect to every imaginable activity. As such, they say Bahamian entrepreneurship will be sharply curtailed, and the rights of Bahamians to fish and use waters around Lighthouse Point will be restricted. All in all, the group says the heads of agreement makes clear the significance of the decision on the future of Lighthouse Point, adding that Bahamian people deserve no less than a fully informed, meaningful public process to determine whether to proceed with such a massive project at such a special place. Meantime, the opposition certainly not taking the letter of intent signed for the purchase of the Grand Lucayan Resort for what it is, and the parties advising Bahamians to be equally critical and approach the announcement with both caution and circumspection. This having witnessed the signing of a multi-million-dollar O-band deal that's now being amended to correct missteps, coupled with a deal announced for West End and Grand Bahama that the PLP points out has just not materialized. The opposition sees this reason enough to examine the Grand Lucayan deal with a fine-tooth comb and ensure the interests of the Bahamians are protected. Royal Caribbean Cruises and the ITM Group's proposed joint venture include the redevelopment of the Grand Bahama Hotel property as well as the Freeport Harbor. Officials say Phase 1 represents a projected $195 million investment over a 24-month period, translating into nearly 2,000 jobs. Discussions leading to a heads of agreement are set to begin immediately as it concerns Bahamian employment requirements and participation in specific areas. The productivity level in the country is not what it should be, and it's impacting the economy. To right this wrong, the National Tripartite Council is looking to act on the recommendations of the International Labor Organization to enact a national productivity legislation, and doing so brings a public relations campaign launched today. Principal of Sumner Strategic Partners Edison Sumner has been tasked with leading the public and private sector consultations in introducing the draft bill and accompanying the white paper to public and private interest for review and comment over the next 5 months. As Mr. Sumner explained, the proposed law is modeled after legislation in Barbados, but customized to reflect the Bahamas' current environment.
The idea is not to point fingers only towards the government, but we have to also look at services that are rendered on the private sector side to see where the bottlenecks are, to find out where we are lacking in skills, where we're lacking in output, where there needs to be incentives to cause our country to produce better. And we're looking at, in this process, we'll be looking at a number of government entities as well. For example, the Passport Office, the Post Office, the Road Traffic Department, to name a few, to find out what areas we can improve upon from the productivity standpoint.
And here's why this is so important.
We're hearing too often when, for example, foreign direct investors are coming in. One of the complaints that I'm sure the chairman would say he's heard, even in his role as Director of Labor, was that there were requests for labor certificates to bring people into the country because they claimed that they could not find the skill sets that they needed to fill certain roles that had to be filled. We want to mitigate those kinds of situations. Right? We want to show the world that the Bahamas is ready to compete on a global stage. We're ready to compete against our colleagues and brothers and sisters in the region. And we certainly want to show that we can compete against the best there are in the world.
A series of town hall meetings will take place beginning as early as next week here in New Providence.
At the end of the exercise, we expect to prepare a report that we presented to the Tripartite Council through Chairman Farquharson, which will highlight the responses from those in industry, from those in government, from those even throughout the Family Islands, because this is not going to be a New Providence-centric exercise. It will take us throughout the entire country to get feedback from everyone throughout the country.
Upon presenting the report to the council, it is hoped that it will be on to the Labor Minister, Dion Folks. Following the killing of a T.A. Thompson student, Pierre Louis, Police Commissioner Anthony Ferguson, when pressed by the media on whether police should beef up patrols in the area where the student was stabbed, he said he feels adequate officers are on the streets. This after Education Minister Jeff Lloyd said police informed him that there is an issue with the schools in that area. Meantime, National Security Minister Marvin Dames said whatever can be done to protect students will be done, as every incident is a cause for concern. This, as school policing, he said, is sometimes that both his ministry and the Ministry of Education has been working on for a while now.
We have officers on the streets daily. I believe that we have adequate officers out there. We're not going to be everywhere, and that is why it's so important that a society, and particularly again, I point to persons who are responsible for the children, to make sure that they are grounded in the right thing and understanding what it is that you ought to be involved in and what you ought not to be involved. We cannot run from that. We cannot run from that. Any attempt to try to run from the instructions by the Bible, then you obviously is not going to make it.
You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.
This segment of the news was brought to you by Alive.